everyone, and welcome to our very first fall 2020 ECE speaker series. I'm Dr. Tisha Shipley, and I am the chair of these sessions. And I'm so excited that you have taken the time to join us for this wonderful talk we are getting ready to have. And don't forget that it will be recorded later on YouTube and housed there for future reference. So welcome and thank you for being here. So today we have with us Laurie Tess. Laurie's career in education took many twists and turns and didn't follow a traditional route. After graduating high school, she went straight into the workforce, but never gave up on her dream of someday getting her education degree. For 17 years, she worked at and owned a daycare preschool, working with children 6 weeks through 12 years. During that time, she worked full-time while slowly pursuing her bachelor's degree via distance learning, and in 2001, graduated with her degree in education. Shortly thereafter, she took a position teaching 4th through 6th graders at St. Mary's Grade School in Burlington. While teaching, her personal love of reading spilled over into the classroom, and she loved helping students become passionate about their own reading. It was during this time that she decided to take this love of literacy to the next level by pursuing her master's degree in reading, and she graduated from Concordia College with a reading specialist degree in 2009. Laurie, we are so excited that you are here with us today. I know your presentation is going to be stellar, so the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Tisha, and hello, everybody. I'm so glad to be here presenting to you today. I wish it could be a live interactive Zoom presentation, but some work obligations prevented me from doing that. However, on the last slide, I've included my school email. So if after the presentation you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. So as Tisha said, I've taken a lot of twists and turns in my teaching career, and I've taken one more since I shared with her my background. For the last 12 years, I've been a reading intervention teacher in my district. And just this year, I took a new position within my district. I will be an EL support teacher, and we have a new role this year of family engagement. So I will be providing resources for our English language learner families, welcoming them to our school, and just being kind of a resource person. So I'm really excited about that. So today I'm going to be sharing with you ways that you can support language and literacy for ELs in the early childhood classroom, but everything I'm going to share with you today applies pretty much to all grade levels. And there are things that you can get started implementing right away. It doesn't take a lot of professional development or continuing education. So we'll get started, and I'm just going to start. And let me just make sure, there we go. So I'm going to start by sharing just a little bit about our English language learners and what they might look like in our classrooms. All of the statistics on this slide have been taken from the US Department of Education, and so they're current, and it's a great website if you ever want to check it out for yourself to get information. So between the 2009-10 and 2014-15 school years, the percentage of our EL students increased in more than half of our states. And in 5 states, that increase was over 40%. So right now, ELs make up about 10% of our K through 12 population. In the 2014-15 school year, we had about 4.8 million EL students in our country, the majority of those being Hispanic students. And our homeless, Title I, and migrant students tend to be our EL students. So that's something important to keep in mind. This graphic here, it's not real clear, but you can see the different colors of purple, and the darker purple colors represent the states that have a very high level or high population of EL students, and then the lighter purple it gets, the less. But you can see that pretty much all of our states do have English learners in the classroom. One of the things that's really important that we know about are the stages of second language development. It's different than the stages we go through when we are learning our native language. And this would apply also, for example, I'm trying to learn as much Spanish as I can. And these stages of language development apply to English speaking people trying to learn another language as well. So our students first go through a pre-production stage, and we often call this a silent stage, and they're assimilating and hearing and kind of soaking in that language that we're speaking to them, but they are not speaking it themselves yet. They'll move from there, hopefully, to an early production stage where they start to speak very, small words and short little phrases and sentences, and then move into that speech emergence and some more beginning fluency where they're speaking longer sentences and phrases. I feel like I'm sort of there with my Spanish. Hopefully I'll be moving to the next stage, which is our intermediate fluency. Communication is pretty fluent in this stage. There might be some gaps in vocabulary, especially that academic vocabulary. And then eventually we hope that our students get to that advanced fluency stage where they can communicate in all contexts, socially and academic. One reason that it's difficult for ELs to acquire a second language is they have to do double the work, really. And this applies, again, if we are learning a second language. Many of my students speak English at school, and they speak their native language at home. And in our district, it's mostly Spanish. So they're constantly going back and forth between two languages, and that transfer can make things difficult for them for a while. Eventually, it is going to serve them very well in literacy. But this is kind of what they have to do. First, they have to mentally translate the question. They have to think, okay, Spanish to English. Then they have to figure out the answer, hope the answer is correct, and then translate it back into English correctly so they can respond. So it's a lot of work. And I know that from trying to speak with parents myself when I'm sitting in conferences. So we need to be very aware of that. One of the most important things we can understand as educators is there's two types of language when we're talking about learning a second language, and that's BICS versus KELP. And I'll explain why that's important. So BICS is that basic interpersonal communication skills. It's more of a social interaction, that social language you might hear on the playground or in the cafeteria or in your classroom when they're conversing with their peers. One of the reasons it's a little easier for students and quicker to grasp is that it relies on a lot of visual cues, such as body language, facial expressions. And so this type of language usually develops with approximately anywhere from 6 months to 2 years after arriving in the United States. And it's not very demanding cognitively. You'll see a lot of the slang that our students use when we're talking about BICS. KELP, on the other hand, is cognitive academic language proficiency. And this is what our ELs need for school success. It takes a lot longer, as you can see, for that to develop. Typically about 5 to 7 years. But if they don't have any prior schooling, or if it's been interrupted, which is the case often with our newcomers, and especially if they don't have language support when they're here in the United States, it can take 7 to 10 years. It's much more demanding. It includes those tier 2 and 3 vocabulary words we might see in academic content. And so the reason this is really important is a lot of times teachers will see students communicating with each other socially in English and assume that they have a really good grasp of the English language. But that would be a mistaken assumption. We often think because they can communicate socially, they don't need support. And they do. They need it to develop that KELP, that academic proficiency language that will help them be successful in school. So that's really, really important to know the difference between. I did want to touch just a little bit on newcomers. A lot of the students I work with have been in the United States for a while or have been born here. But we're seeing more and more newcomers coming to our country, those students and their families who come directly from another country very quickly for a lot of different reasons. And there's some things that we might take for granted when, and I have done it as well, when those students come to our school. So even if a student has had prior schooling in their native country, we can't assume that it looks anything like what our United States schools look like. Very often it's not similar at all. So that's the first thing we need to keep in mind. Secondly, we need to remember that it's not just the students we're working with, it's the families. And parents can be very intimidated when their children come to a new country and start a new school because of the language barrier. So we need to make them aware of things that we just take for granted, like the school calendars, how to enroll online, what school supplies are needed, the school websites, figuring out transportation, even when the school day begins and ends, those kinds of things. And we also can't assume that our students know what a typical US school looks like. They might not know how to use a bubbler or what recess is or how to use hand sanitizer or the dryers in the bathroom, those kinds of things. I'll never forget one year we had a little boy come to our school and he thought the bubbler was for washing his hands. And so we can't just assume that they know what our native speaking students know. What really helps is having a designated person at each school if possible who can act like a liaison for our parents, helping them feel welcome not only at school, but in this country and in your community. Both the United States Department of Education and Colorado have numerous resources that will help parents and teachers. A lot of their articles have the option to translate into other languages. And I've included the links for those sites at the end of the slideshow. They're very helpful sites. And then finally, we need to be very sensitive to what our families have come from. Some of the stories I've heard from our newcomers are literally heartbreaking. It just breaks my heart. And we need to know that even though we don't know their whole story, we need to be compassionate and realize that the families might need some emotional support as well. So getting the school counselor on board is important as well. So some things you can do without having a lot of EL background or knowledge. First and foremost is building background. Background knowledge is kind of the foundation of our learning. And we need to sometimes build that background, not just for our ELs, but for maybe our students who live in poverty. They don't have the same experiences as other students. And so we do need to sometimes build that. But we don't want to think of background knowledge as like a deficit or a gap, because our ELs bring a rich range of experiences and perspective to our classrooms. And it's really important we tap into that. Not only for them, but for us, we can learn so much from them. So we can learn about them in a lot of ways. Maybe they can draw. If they're not speaking the language yet, they can do drawings. If they're orally able to tell or write in either language, have them do that. But we need to take some responsibility too. And so researching our students' background, learning about their culture, their holidays, their traditions. One thing we did here a couple years ago is hold a multicultural fair. We've had Hispanic heritage celebrations, those kinds of things. And finally, take advantage of any opportunity to help students make a connection. Show how a topic you're talking about might connect to something in their culture, or give an example of how they might experience it in their country. Have them bring in music or art from their culture and talk about it. We need to really honor the diversity in our classrooms because we can learn so much from each other. One of the most important things when working with our ELs is helping them develop the English vocabulary they need to be successful. And our children get words many different ways, ELs and native speakers. Conversation is really important. So those conversations, that playtime, that dramatic play area, all those things, recess, lunch, are learning opportunities. Conversation is taking place. It's also important to have explicit instruction. Determine what your students need, and if necessary, instruct explicitly. One of the most important things, and I'll talk more about it here shortly, is reading and being read to. Students of every grade level enjoy being read to, and there's so much vocabulary they can learn. And then finally, pre-teaching. So looking ahead at what our students need to know. How can we pre-teach that in a way that sets our EL students up for success? So I'm going to talk a little bit about our read alouds here. First of all, read alouds, like I said, are important for all ages, ELs and native speakers. And there's a couple of ways that vocabulary is acquired when you're doing a read aloud. Now, the first is incidental. You don't really plan for teaching a word ahead of time, but it's still maybe absorbed or acquired by the student through context or the way that you're reading it, your expression, your facial expressions. It can be embedded. So maybe you give just a little information about the word, a synonym or quick definition as you're reading, and there's not much disruption to the story. And then finally, there's focused, where you've identified ahead of time those words you feel are important. And then you have a little more focused discussion, maybe before or after the reading takes place. There are some strategies that you can use to help students acquire vocabulary during read alouds. Before you read, look through the book. Identify keywords you think they might have difficulty with. Pay attention to those tier 2 and 3 words, those academic vocabulary words, but also think about those everyday items that are really common to us, but they might not know about in their culture. Before you even start to read, you can start to activate that prior knowledge. Have discussions with the students. Ask what they already know. Take picture walks. Use realia, those hands-on real items. So if you are going to read a story, say about different food groups, have some real or plastic foods to show them before reading the story. By assessing their knowledge, what they already know, we can determine what words they're already familiar with, what concepts they're familiar with, and then which ones need just a little more communication. Some points to remember before you begin reading. Again, read the book beforehand. That's really important. If possible, if you're reading a chapter book to older students, if you don't have time to read the whole book, just read a couple chapters at a time before sharing with the students. So you can identify any words that could be tricky. Idioms are really tricky for ELs, as are tier 2 and 3 words. I'll never forget one time I was reading a short passage with a student, and it was something about the difference between a squid and an octopus, I think. And one of the sentences was, the squid on the other hand, and then it went on to discuss. And my student took it to mean literally that the squid had another hand. So we need to think about those things. Think about which strategy you want to use. Is it a word that can be embedded? You can just quick give a synonym or quick definition, or is it something that needs a little more clarification after reading? We want to disrupt the actual story as little as possible. And just keep in mind, some strategies might be more appropriate for other grade levels than others. So think about that. And then always try and find a way afterwards to follow up in some way. Maybe show a video, or have the student do some writing if they're an older student. So find a way to allow for more exposure to that vocabulary after reading the book. Family engagement for our ELs is really important. And it's one of the reasons I'm super excited about this new position that I'm taking this year. I feel it's an area we need to work on in our district, so I'm excited about it. There's a lot of ways that you could engage our families. And like I said, U.S. Department of Education, Colorín Colorado has several ideas for you. But you could welcome your new families by maybe providing like a little welcome packet that includes school and community information in their language. Always important to have teachers in your building that can interpret or take phone calls or assist at conferences. Invite a parent to come into your classroom and share their culture with you. Honor that diversity in our classrooms. Hold bilingual nights, multicultural fairs, those kinds of things. And make sure that your school websites have a translating capacity. That can be a really tricky thing for parents, especially online registration at the beginning of the school year. I'm going to share this doc here quickly. This was something we put together a couple of years ago. We held a La Noche Hispana for our Spanish families, a Spanish multicultural night is what it ended up being. And so we had things like having a sign at the entrance in English and Spanish directing parents where to go. We had a welcome and introduction to our parents in both Spanish and English. We provided a mariachi band. We had some of our students sing Hispanic songs, and they learned to dance. They did artwork, and we had it in the gym for parents to look at. We did drawings for educational gift bags that would be appropriate for our EL students and their families. So there's a lot of things you can do to make our families feel welcome. And then finally, it's important to know that one slideshow obviously cannot do justice to the needs of our EL students. We're all at some point going to be working with ELs in our classroom. And ideally, districts at a minimum would offer yearly continuing education for all staff, at least on the reading and writing strategies for our EL students. But we know that's not always possible. So if that district professional development isn't available, we need to take responsibility for our own research and education. We owe that to our EL students. There's lots of opportunities to do that through books, articles, websites, and webinars. That Colorín Colorado has great wealth of resources for teachers. It's amazing. I highly recommend you check it out. One thing you could do is visit other schools that have an EL program or a bilingual or a dual language program and see what kinds of things they do. And then finally, network with colleagues. That's really important because sometimes, especially in small districts, it's easy to feel like you're kind of on your own little island. And so reach out, get ideas from colleagues, other schools, other districts. There's a lot that we can do to further our education so that we're there for our EL students. I have provided some resources here, some links that you can click on. We have the National Center for Education Statistics. That is a great site. That's where I got the beginning statistics from. Colorín Colorado, which I actually am going to click on in a moment and just show you because I love this site. The U.S. Department of Education. This is an article about supporting newcomers and then a newcomers toolkit. So if you are working with newcomers in your school or district, these would be great sites. So Colorín Colorado looks like this. There's basics for ELL teachers, school support, ways that you can support in your schools, a lot of information about teaching ELs, information for families, books and authors, videos. There's a whole resource library. If, let's say, you want to direct your families here, or you want to print out the article for them, you can click and it will translate it into Spanish. And I do believe Spanish is the only language for this one, but there are other sites that you could investigate. But I highly recommend this one. I use it a lot. So it's a lot of information in a short slideshow. Like I said, one presentation doesn't do it justice, but we are all probably at some time or another going to be working with students with a background other than English. And there are a lot of things that we can do to support those students, help them be successful, both in school and in this country. I've included my email address here at school. If you have any questions or I can help you in any way, feel free, please, to reach out to me and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And I wish you great success as the new school year begins. And I hope you're all safe and happy and well. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out. Thanks, everyone.
Laurie, that was amazing. I was getting so many great ideas. Thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Good. I hope it's helpful. And like I said, if anyone has any questions, they can certainly reach out.
Perfect. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, thanks. Take care.